Welcome to Celtic Medicine Stories, a podcast where we explore stories from the old Celtic lands with the understanding that they carry medicine for us. I'm your host, Catherine Parker, and I offer these stories in the spirit of the oral storytelling tradition of the British Isles. That is, they are free and they're open to everyone, always. Although these stories often have come from another time and have evolved through time with the oral storytelling tradition, they are here still for a reason. If you're curious about going deeper with this story, with the images, symbols, characters, landscapes, sounds, whatever it is that's speaking to you from this particular story, then there are some free resources below which will help guide you in that process. This one again. This story won't leave me alone. It's a retelling of Merlin as it comes through me often. We have little on record of this battle, this instigating event. The battle recorded in the year of 573. Its location thought to have been what is now an old field just north of the Scottish-English border. And it's recorded as one of the 3 futile battles of Britain. It's also recorded that this is the battle in which Merlin went mad and spent 3 days and 3 nights without food, drink, or sleep up in the wildwood. In this telling, the story of the battle and what happened afterwards is my imagining, having spent time up there on that land and time fasting out in the woods. The prophecy at the end of this telling has been recorded in multiple ways in multiple texts. I recommend you give yourself some space to listen to this one. It's not good driving material. It might require you to dig into your own loss and what we've lost collectively. And from that, the seeds of knowing push through the dark soil, bringing new life. I invite you to reflect on what it might mean to turn yourself into soil. So as you listen to this story, as with all these Celtic medicine stories, let yourself float. You don't need to pay attention in the way maybe you were asked to do in school. You don't need to try and follow the plot line or the dialogue or anything in particular. In fact, the medicine lies in what you find yourself attending to. So when you let yourself go into that receptive, floaty state and you find your mind wanting to savor an image or a sound or a word, and you find yourself more engaged with that than whatever it is that I'm saying, then notice that. You don't need to analyze it or try and figure it out in that moment, but just notice it, that called your attention, because that's where the medicine lies. Wherever this story interacts with your story is what you're looking for. And I believe this is part of why these stories have been around for so long, is because they each interact with us in some special way. And so as you listen, just let yourself absorb it and notice which parts stick out to you. Travel with me, if you will, back across the Atlantic Ocean, back through the time and through the misty clouds that cover the west coast of Scotland. And come and land with me. Let your feet land on the soft ground that surrounds Loch Mabon, the lake of the divine child. And as you find your feet on the edge of the loch, you'll realize to the south is a large building constructed of stone with a big conical thatch roof, and the smoke is swirling out the top. If you come with me and you gently push open the big wooden door, you'll see inside that fire burning at the center of this building. A circle of people sitting around, and over on one edge, a table with people preparing herbs and pouring liquids and doing something busily over there, while those at the fire gaze into the flame. To walk with me, come on in through the door, let it close behind you, and take your seat at the circle around the fire. And you will see that this is a healing circle. People have traveled for many, many miles across the country to come and sit with these elders. There's an old man with a long white beard and an old woman with a gray braid holding this circle as others move around to the sides. And you will see amongst this circle one man who seems to be charged with the task of singing the healing songs. And they call him Lailoken, chief of the songs, because he indeed has trained for many, many, many years, and he knows all the songs. And whenever something is needed, the old woman might call him over and call over somebody with some herbs or a liquid to drink to a person who's struggling with something, and call over Lailoken, and he will gently sing the charm in their ear. You watch him move around the circle. There seems no end to the number of songs that he knows. But the old man on this particular night can sense that something is up with Lailoken. He's not settled in the way he usually is, and he calls Lailoken over and says, you go take a break, go on outside. And with a bow of appreciation, you see Lailoken head for the door, and out he goes. And as he gets out of the building and comes around the corner, he whistles because his wolf is resting behind the building. And the two of them off at a trot. This is what he needed. He needed to move his body. And so he walks fast out the gate and up the path through the fields and up into the tree line and up and up and up into the hills and into the wood, the wolf running beside him now. He's running. He can feel his blood pumping in his veins as his body's moving the energy he was feeling. Because indeed there is something weighing very heavily on Lailoken this evening. They are approaching a battle just a few days from now. He knows it's happening. It's been scheduled. They're ready. They're preparing for it. And he is the chief bard of the local chief, Gwenthelau. And many, many of the men and women that he knows and loves and is cared for and is healed will be part of this battle on both sides. Because this battle is not between those that live here and those that are invading. This is between neighbors, between friends, between cousins and brothers. And this weighs very heavily on him. So as he runs through the woods, he starts to feel the drag of his breath and his muscles burning, and he comes to a place he's been many times before, a grove of old oaks twisted. And he comes to rest by the biggest one in the most northerly part of the grove. And he calls out in prayer to his ancestors. He calls to the spirit of this place and he asks for their help, for he has a very bad feeling about this battle. And he sits down and he lets his back rest against this very old oak tree. And as his eyes shift and widen and his heart slows, he notices at the corner of his eye a dead oak tree, one that's been laying, he's seen it many times before, covered in fungi, beginning to transform it. He notices it. And he hears the message as part of the cycle of life. And he says, I know that. I know that. I know that death is part of the cycle of life. And he hears the strong message again. Lailoken, yes, you know with your mind. But until you have turned yourself into soil, you don't know. With that, an uneasy feeling came upon him. He gave his thanks to the trees and to the ancestors, and he left. Now, it was just a few more days before the battle started, and already people were gathering. Men and women had come from across the land, dragging their carts, their horses, their cows, their cat, their sheep, bringing whatever weapons they could find. This was not a standing army. This was the people coming to this battle. On the morn of the battle, they were all lined up, one side against the other. They had with them their rakes and their spears and their swords and their shields and their sticks and whatever they could find. Some of them even had their children, their families with them way back behind the lines, because what else were they going to do with them? They had to bring them. There was nowhere else to leave them. Some of the elderly were back there too, with buckets of water and bandages and sharpening tools for their swords, and they were ready. And the drums of war began to beat. And they beat, and they beat, and they beat. And as they fastened, they went faster and faster and faster, raising the battle frenzy, boiling the blood of the men and women who were lined up, ready to fight for their people, fight for their home, and the drums kept going. The drums went faster and faster and faster, beating the rhythm of war. Their feet began to stomp. They banged their shields, they banged their swords, they banged their spears on the ground. And only when every foot was stomping did Liloken begin to sing. And he sang of the old ones. He sang of the heroes. He sang of those in other battles who had survived. He sang of those who died. He sang and he sang as the drums went on and on and on. He sang and he sang, singing to the men, singing to the women who were bearing their souls, facing death themselves. And as the drums went on, the drums of war, he sang. And as metal began to clash against metal, and metal against bone, and the screams curdled the air in the field, he sang his promise. He sang the promise to the men and women who were standing in the field. He sang his promise that your song will be sung. No matter whether you live, no matter whether you die, your song will be sung. This is our promise. This is my promise. The future bards will sing your song. Whether you live, whether you die. And the battle raged, they say, for days. They don't know. It raged on and on. Many, many fell. And of the evenings, as the sun set in the west, they would withdraw, go to their camp, bandage people up, bring healing potions, bring healing herbs, bring food, bring water, tend to those that were fighting. And during those evenings, Liloken did not rest, because he could see the shades of those that had fallen. He could see them filtering up above the battlefield, looking for home. And so he'd sing. He'd sing the songs of love. He'd sing the songs of homecoming. His voice becoming a stream of sound that these souls could follow to the river where their ancestors waited for them. Only in the small hours of the morning did he fall asleep, when he was sure that all the souls are tended to. He'd get up each morning and the same thing. The drums would start, the singing would start, the clashing would start, the falling would continue. And at some point, Liloken became aware that all of his brothers had died. And he was desperately looking out for his nephew, young man, not more than 13 summers, who had been raised by his sister who had married the opposing king. So his nephew was fighting against most of his people. He couldn't see him. He'd been tracking him this whole time. He couldn't see him. And suddenly he became aware of his spirit, the nephew's spirit, lifting up from the battlefield as his body must have fallen. And soon after that, he saw his king, Gwenthilao, pulled from his horse, and he saw Rudrick's flag go up. The enemy flag had gone up, and there was a huge cheer. It was over. Gwenthilao had fallen. Liloken's people had lost. And he could not take it any more. He did what no self-respecting Celt should ever do. He whistled his wolf, and he walked off the battlefield. He didn't turn to look. He couldn't. His heart was bursting open with the amount of loss that had just happened. He couldn't even look. He just kept walking and walking and walking, and he crossed the river, and he crossed the fields, and he went up and north and up and north, and the further he went, the faster he went, and he was running. Even though his body was drained, he hadn't slept or eaten in days, he was running up into the hills, his wolf beside him. And he traveled far. He doesn't know how far he've traveled up the creeks, up the streams, all the way up to the deep, deep ravines of the high hills. And as dark began to fall, he sensed that they were coming for him. He's the chief bard. There's no way they were going to let him go. They must have seen him leave. He could feel them coming. So he looked around, and he found, within the woods he was in, quite large apple tree. He climbed up the apple tree, and he saw his wolf disappear under a bush. And the feeling of being chased got stronger, and eventually he could hear them clattering through the forest, Rudrick's men following him. So he gathered all the parts of himself and he pulled them in. And as he breathed down into the roots of the tree and up into the branch of the tree, and he got totally still and merged with the trunk of this apple tree. And in his silence, he heard them clattering around below, looking for him. Their hunting dogs lost his scent. He stayed suspended within the bark of the tree. He could smell them, smell death on them. And eventually they left, and he stayed there with the tree, silent, still, his blood boiling with the rage of what had happened, until it was pitch black and the stars were out, and he could hold on no longer, and he let himself slide down the trunk and fell into the grass. And he began to sob. He sobbed. Huge waves of grief racking his body, pulling him into the dirt, his face in the dirt, his fists pounding the earth as the sobs moved out of his body and the tears streamed down his face, flowing into the soil, flowing through the cracks between the grass, flowing into the burn and down into the river. He cried a whole river of tears out into the earth and down into the water. And he cried and he cried and he cried until his throat was red raw. There was snot falling from his nose. His hair was covered in dirt. And at some point, he fell asleep. And when he came to, still dark, he whistled. His wolf came and licked his face, and he got up and he began to walk. No, he didn't know where he was going. He just began to walk because that's what needed to happen. And had one watched him, you might have thought he was moving aimlessly throughout the forest, but he was following something inside of him that could not be seen from outside. And it said he wandered like this for 3 days and for 3 nights, and he didn't eat and he didn't drink and he didn't sleep. For 3 days and for 3 nights he wandered through the wildwood, him and the wolf. And at some point on that 4th night, he found himself way up at the top, right above the tree line where the hill is bald and he's exposed to the stars and the moon. And he lay down on his back and he gazed up at the infinite sky, at the ancestors twinkling back. And it is said that at that point, his spirit started to lift out of his body, started to merge with the wind. But he heard something. He heard something like a drum beating. Ba-boom, 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 ba-boom. The sound of his own heartbeat calling him. Ba-boom, ba-boom. Calling him back to his body. Calling him back to this earthly plane. Calling him back to this hilltop. And as he came back in, it was clear he knew what he needed to do. So he got up and he whistled the wolf and he started to make his way down the hill, crashing through the bushes, through the undergrowth, snapping branches as he went. He knew exactly where he needed to go because the sun was starting to come. He could see the gray crack of first light cracking in the east, and he knew he had to get to the spring. And as he scrabbled down a scree slope on his butt all the way down to this rocky outcrop, he knew it was there. There it was, the spring. He's seen it before, and this is what he needed to do. And as the first rays of the sun came up over the eastern ledge, he put his hands under the trickle of life, this water spilling out of the hillside, and he poured it to his lips. And he looked up at the sun rising. He said, I choose you. I choose you, life. And he drank the spring water and coursed down into his body, filling him with vitality, and he couldn't get enough of it. He scooped and he scooped and he scooped and he splashed himself with this spring water, bringing him awake, bringing him alive as the sun's rays hit his skin, warming him up. And his heart beat, ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom. And he realized one thing. He was ravenously hungry. And so he scrambled back up that scree bank and went back up into the forest. And he knew he'd seen all these plants these whole 3 days. He knew exactly where to look for apples. And he knew exactly where to look for the roots that he could eat. And he knew exactly where the berries were. And he went and he ate and he ate and he ate and he drank more. And he brought his body back to life. Now we don't know how long he was up there. Some say 3 years, some say 7. He was there for some time. And he got very used to living in the woods. He knew where all the food was. He knew where all the animals were. They accepted him as part of their forest community. He was there for a very long time. And one afternoon, he was laying up back on that bald spot at the top of the hill, and he heard a flute. Not something he'd heard in a very long time. He heard a flute in the edge of the trees, and as he turned, he saw somebody scamper away. And he went to look in that spot where they were, and there, folded neatly, was a very fine gray woolen cloak that fit him really well. And he knew it was from his sister. And he took it, and indeed, yes, he could use it, for the nights were chilly up here. And the next afternoon, he was laying up there again, getting the last of the sun, and he heard the flute again. And this time he turned to look, and the person stayed there. And he heard a voice say, Your sister wants to see you. She invites you to Rudrick's castle. You will be taken care of, and no harm will come to you. She says, please, please, please come. And he nodded, his acknowledgement of the message. And the message carrier scampered off. And so the next morning, he decided, yes, okay, I'll go visit my sister. I miss her. And his sister, remember, is married to King Rudrick, the king who now is over all of this land that used to be Gwenthela's. And so he made his way down the hill, along the burn to the big flowing river, and further along, and he walked and he walked and he walked, and it took him most of the day. But eventually he arrived at the big gates to the fort, and there were other humans there, and he'd sort of forgotten that there'd be other humans there, and realized that he had moss in his beard and twigs probably in his hair, and he was covered in dirt, and he looked like an old beggar man, and people snickered as he went past. Merlin. They called him Merlin. The mad one. Looks like a madman. Who's that madman? They snickered as he walked by, and he just shrugged and kept going. Somebody came out and showed him to the court where his sister and the king were sitting, holding court. When his sister saw him, her face lit up, and she said, there you are. When he saw her, he looked at her, and he burst out laughing. What have you been doing? There's leaves in your hair. You look worse than me, sister. You've got leaves in your hair because you've been rolling around under a tree with your lover, haven't you? She went bright red, and she could see her husband, the king, his blood starting to boil. Quick-witted, as always, she turned to her husband and said, Oh, goodness, my brother must have lost his mind out there. Look at him. He's mad, rambling madman that he is. Don't listen to a word he's saying. She could see her husband was not convinced. She said, Look at him, look at him. He thinks he's a prophet. He thinks he's some wise man. He's just a madman. I'll prove it to you. I will prove it to you. This man does not know what he is talking about at all. Bring me a serving boy from the kitchen. Bring me somebody. Come on, bring them in. She called. A serving boy was brought from the kitchen. She stood him in front of her brother, and she said, Tell me, Then, O wise one, tell me how this one will die. And her brother raised an eyebrow and said, well, clearly, I can see that this one will die from a fall. Okay, very well. She turned to the king. She said, wait, let me show you. She sent the serving boy back to the kitchen and she gave instructions. Psst, psst, psst. Dress him up as a girl and bring him back. So indeed, the same boy was brought back, but this time dressed as a girl. Put him in front of her brother and she said, well, wise brother, how's this one going to die? Again, he looked at her quizzically. Well, I can see that this one is going to die from a stabbing. She could see the king starting to soften now. She said, okay, one more. I'll prove it to you for final that he's just a madman. He doesn't know what he's talking about. So she sent the serving boy girl back to the kitchen and said, dress him up as something different. So he came back with another disguise on. She put him in front of her brother. And she said, come on then. Well, what about this one? How's this one going to die? And so he said, well, clearly I can see this one's going to die of a drowning. The serving boy was whisked away. And the queen relaxed as she felt the king laugh. I see, a madman. Yes, well, we'll give him food and we'll give him comfort and he's welcome to stay. I know he's your brother. It's okay that he doesn't make any sense. It's all right. We're happy to feed him and shelter him for as long as he needs. So it was that he got a bed and he got some really good food and he got everything that he needed. But he couldn't make it more than a few days. Because as he looked around the court, he could see these people pulsing, their life force, their essence pulsing in them, but covered with these clouds of pretense, clouds of falseness that he had no time for. He found himself spending most of his time outdoors with the trees and the plants and the animals and the birds, those whose essence just sung through them, those who just were who they were without all the cloudy confusion of the human world. And so it said that he didn't last very long. After a few days of some good food and some hot baths and some warm bed sheets, he told his sister they had to return. And she begged him to stay because she missed him and because she needed him and she needed his gifts. She knew that he was not a madman. She needed his wisdom. But he was not willing to stay. He said, well, if you want to help me, then you can come and build me a shelter so that I can be warm during the winter. But it must have 7 windows because I need to be able to see. And so he headed back up into the wildwood, and indeed, she kept true to her promise, and she sent a whole bunch of men up there and built him a shelter so that he could be warm at least during the winter nights. And he was up there again alone for many, many years. Until that young boy from the kitchen had grown. He was about 15 now, and he was out riding his horse with some friends one afternoon. And he took his horse too close to an edge that overlooked a river, and his horse stumbled, and he fell, and he hit the ground. And as he tumbled down, he was stabbed by the limb of a tree, and as he tumbled further, he fell into the river. And so it came to pass that he indeed died 3 times in 3 ways, from a fall, from a stabbing, and from a drowning. And this was noticed. And this was remembered. And they remembered who it was who had prophesied this triple death. And so he started to notice that people were coming up to visit him. They were seeking him out. And they would come and sit by his fire. And they had questions. They wanted to know. And they wanted to hear his stories, and they wanted to hear his songs. And the more that people came and they went back and things became true, the prophecies were heard and they came true, more and more people came. Until he had quite a flux of people sitting at his fire, bringing him gifts, bringing him food, bringing him clothes, bringing him bed sheets, bringing him soup, and asking questions, asking for help, asking for guidance, asking what will come. And this one who had so many of the old stories stored inside of him would open his mouth and out would come the truth, always. Sometimes they didn't believe it, but always it came to pass. And so it went on for many years. And every morning, every single morning, when he would wake up and he'd hear his heartbeat, ba-boom, boom, boom, he knew he was still here. He was still here on this earthly plane. One more day had been gifted to him. That he would get up, no matter where he had fallen asleep. He would get up and he would find his way to that spring before dawn. And he'd wait there for the sun to rise above the eastern ridge. And he'd cup his hands under the flow of life that came from the hill. And just as the sun came up over the eastern ridge, he would drink and he would say, I choose you, life. And so it was. Or so they say it was. Thank you for listening to this episode of Celtic Medicine Stories. If you want to go deeper, check out my Working with Archetypes free email course. There's a link somewhere in these notes. You'll find it. And feel free to visit on my website, ancestralconnections.earth. I'd love to hear from you. Go well.